Welcome to The Right Stuff, your home for all things on the writing craft. Woo! It's been a while since I've done one of these. Author Robert Bone here for another video, and this time we're going to be talking about editing, and specifically how I go about editing. Now, what I do may not work for you, but may give you some ideas on how you can edit more effectively. As always, if you enjoy my content and or learn something useful, please like and subscribe so you can get more content on the writing craft. If you'd like to take part in the discussion, comment below. Now, if you're new to this channel, let me just point out that I often approach subjects from a beginner's viewpoint. So I might lay out topics at a pretty basic level, but I still try to tackle more in-depth conversation surrounding the topic. That said, let's get to it. Editing, what is it? Editing is when you go back through your manuscript and make it better. Editing can really happen at any part of the writing process, but generally when people talk about editing, they're talking about what they're doing after you write out your first draft. Now, the first couple of times I wrote a novel, I didn't have a great process that worked for me. I just kind of wrote a little bit, edited, wrote a little more, edited some more, and so on. Then when I finished and thought the story was in a good place, I went back through to clean up the grammar and improve my prose a little bit and called it good. Since then, I've matured a lot and I have kind of come up with a process that works for me. And the first step in that process is worrying about creating my rough draft. That is the only thing that I kind of focus on. And I guess you wouldn't really say this is the process of editing, but that's kind of where everything starts. So let me just pause for a second, because how you do your rough draft is going to affect the way you edit. For me, and you're going to hear for me a lot. So let's just get that out of the way. For me, I am a pantser. And if you have been in the writing scene for a little while, you know what that is. Sometimes called a discovery writer, where as a pantser or discovery writer, you're just going through and you're writing the story as it comes to you. Now that can involve doing like partial outlines, or doing just like going back, even if you're not all the way done, or kind of, you can plan some stuff out, right, as a pantser. But the other side of that is an outliner, somebody who kind of writes out their whole story in outline form and then goes in and fills everything in and writes out all the prose and dialogue and everything like that. So me as a pantser, I've found that I do my best work when I follow the story. I get it onto the paper or Word doc or what have you and write until I reach the end. And my rough draft consists of the story that comes out, and my only goal is to get the story out until I have gone through the entire plot for that particular novel from beginning to end. Now, I do very little corrections, very little plot restructuring, very little prose cleaning, say figuring out where my endpoint for the novel is going to be, because I do that. In order for me to write my novel, I have to know where my endpoint is, and then I can fill in the journey from there. So except for figuring out where my endpoint, I do little else besides get the story out of my head and into print. I know some authors out there who have to edit as they go. Some keep their prose as clean as possible on their first go, and if that works for you, great. More power to you. However you compose your first draft will affect how your editing process takes place. So let's get back to editing. As I said, first I create my first draft. Once that's completed, I'll go back and work the story. And this is where I focus on the big idea parts. I'll try to figure out where my story falls flat. Ask the questions, is the story boring? Does the timeline of events make sense? And when I say timeline, I don't mean the world timeline. I mean, do the events occur within a reasonable and explainable number of hours, days, or years? And have I conveyed that passage of time effectively, right? And so I can't have someone travel to another land by horse and pretend like only one single day has passed. That just doesn't make sense. So I focus on that sort of thing. I'll also ask myself, if I've kept my descriptions of characters, places, eye color, whatever consistent, my world building and my characters, I have to keep those consistent as well. Is there a huge lull in pacing that drags the novel down? Is it only nonstop action where the reader doesn't have a chance to breathe? I will go through all of these aspects, making sure that the plot is in a solid place. And this process usually consists of 1 to 2 more drafts or rounds of editing after my rough draft. So the rough draft is pretty much 1 round unless there's something really important that I forgot to go or do on the first go. Or if I detect a serious flaw early enough, then I might do 2 rounds on kind of the rough draft. But even then, it's just going back and adding that part in and not rewriting the whole thing. So if you're a new writer, you're going to find keeping track of all these questions through 1 draft is going to be really difficult. And that isn't to say that I keep track of all of them in 1 draft. Keeping all these things in mind does take practice, and eventually these ideas will fall into place more naturally as you write. On your 2nd or 3rd book, you'll start to look out for those things without really thinking about it. And side note here, this is the same for things such as writing an active voice, more natural sounding prose, sentence length variation, all of that. It takes less and less intentional thought to get these things right the 1st, 2nd, or even 3rd round. The more you write, it just starts coming naturally. You just naturally start to do it the more experience you have under your belt. Now, one thing that I would highly recommend is that as you write your rough draft, or even if you're going through your 2nd draft, and I do this on both, write questions or comments throughout the manuscript where there are problems or you don't remember specific details. If you use Microsoft Word, you can use the comments feature. And though I haven't used them, I know there are other software programs out there that can help you keep track of these things, such as Scrivener or Campfire, and I'm sure there's more than that. But just as an example, I'll write myself comments concerning detail consistencies, clunky prose, parts where I think I could use a bit more explanation or detail, and so on, so that when I go back through, I have all those changes to make, and I don't have to keep in mind or keep track mentally that one part that felt a little off. So I end up with tens of comments that I don't have to worry about remembering because I've already put them into comment form. I've saved them without slowing down my rough draft and or 2nd draft. It really helps. So find a way to do that if you think that helps you. So then once I'm done with story editing, I move on to kind of the more meticulous editing, the boring stuff. This is kind of my last phase of improvements on my novel before I get outside feedback. Once the story is down and in the correct place, with all the inconsistencies, pacing issues, and plot elements tidied up, I focus on copy editing and proofreading. Now, some people might need to do these 2 things separately, but for me, I work this out together because when I move to this phase, that's when I start reading it aloud. Since this consists of about 2 or 3 more drafts, because I'll do 2 or 3 read-throughs and then fix as I go, I'll take this time to make sure it reads smoothly, as well as fix, capitalization, grammar, spelling, and that sort of thing, punctuation. This is also where I'll catch a lot of my poorly written sentences. When I read aloud and I stop mid-sentence and say, wait, what? That's generally when I know I've written something stupid and it needs to be fixed. If I can understand it, then obviously my readers aren't going to understand it. So saying things out loud really helps me just catch kind of my flow and my readability of my work, as opposed to reading it inside my own head. Because it's when you speak it aloud, you can hear how it sounds. And maybe you're saying I'm not an auditory learner, so that's not going to work for me. Honestly, I'm not either. I have a hard time following a train of thought by listening, but there's just something about reading my own work out loud that helps me check how smooth it reads. And I suggest giving it a try if you haven't already. It could be a game changer. So, If you were paying attention, my process typically goes rough draft, which is getting the story onto the screen or paper, editing the big ideas or plot of the story, and then I do the meticulous prose cleaning and proofreading. It's almost like I'm starting with my author lens zoomed out, and with each step zooming in a little bit more. And this works for me because if I were to start zoomed out and then zoom in and then have to zoom out again, I would lose all of that momentum that I gained for each step. I'd lose all the momentum for my rough draft, and that's when I get the story out. So I have to keep going on that rough draft. Otherwise, everything's going to come to a screeching halt if I decide to start fixing every spelling mistake and every grammar mistake. So I can't write story, then edit, then try to get back to story. And maybe this is because I'm a pantser, or maybe it's just the way my mind works, but this guarantees me the best results. And you may have a different experience. I know some writers who need to edit as they go along because if their prose aren't great, they can't write until the story is fixed. Or they can't write more story until it's fixed. And maybe it just bugs them too much. Others might need to write through a couple of chapters or through a story arc, then go back and edit before moving on. It just all depends on what works best for you and how you operate. And as you go about writing and editing, I would definitely advise you to pay close attention to where your best work is coming from. Pay attention to what works best for you. If you try something new, determine if that method worked better for you than other things you've tried. If not, give another method a try, or go back to what you maybe thought wasn't working, but maybe it kind of worked, because maybe what you thought didn't work actually was the best way for you to do your editing. And hopefully I did not just confuse the crap out of you. I'm trying to make this make sense, but whatever feels right, use that until you think a different method might serve you better. So I guarantee that there is no one right way to edit that is universal to all writers. You have to be able to take the time to figure out what works best for you, because you are different from the next writer. And that's where you'll find the most success and efficiency in your work. So please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this bit of writing advice. And if you want to read Ages of Ashea, my fantasy novels, you can find the link to the series in the description below. And that's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me here on The Write Stuff, and keep writing.